Hi and welcome to this video in Python programming language. In the previous video we talked about functions, user-defined functions. In this video we talk about built-in functions, functions that are already built in Python and we don't need to define anything, just go ahead and directly use them. So let's go to the IPython and look at some code. The first function we're going to look at is the absolute value function. So absolute value -3 equals 3, straightforward, nothing special there. The minimum of, say, a list of values, let's say 2, 5, 6, 1, 9, and then you can compute the minimum value. You could do the same thing with the maximum value, so just replace the min with the max. So all these are, again, defined functions, and they can be used the same way we used functions, but now, again, without defining anything, obviously. We've seen actually some of the other functions already, like the int function. If you want to convert a given numeric variable into an integer, if it's not an integer already, let's say you define x equals, let's say as a string, 5. So obviously if you go type, and that's another function actually, type right there, type x, a string, so we could do y equals int x. And now if you print y or type y, y is taken as an integer, so 5. We could do, again, the same thing. We could convert now y into a string. We use str y, and then it'll be taken as a string, and so forth. As you can see, it's printed as a string. The same thing with float parentheses, and the number, if you want to convert the number into a string, so whatever number goes in the parentheses here will be converted into a float. The same thing we do when we convert, say, a tuple to a list. So you could do a list, and then again, if you have a tuple inside, it will convert that tuple into a list. Vice versa, we can do tuple parentheses, again, converting a list into a tuple. We can use the range command. Range from, let's say, 10 gives a list of elements starting at 0 all the way to 9. You can specify the starting point, creates a list starting at 3 going all the way to 10, not including 10. We can start with, let's say, 3, 10, 3. This is the step, so it goes 3, 6, 9, and then stops. We can do negative indexing. So before we even go to the negative indexing, if you start with actually a number, let's say 4, 2, you get an empty list, obviously, because you go 4 to 2, you don't go anywhere. So, but you could do that if you wish to start, let's say you go 10 here, all the way to 2, -1. You can do a negative step. That would make sense. You can start with a negative number, so it doesn't have to be positive. If we go here, let's say -4 to 2, it'll also print. The range function is mostly used with for loops. So for, say, x in range 0 to 10, just as an example, carry out the following operation. So you can use that as it iterate over the elements of this list. So that's the most usage of that. We use also x range. I might have mentioned it in the past. Just to explain quickly here, let's say 10 here. Notice it doesn't produce the list. So if you go type x range 10, and you'll see that it's not really a list, it's actually an x range object. It's an object, unlike if we do let's say range instead of x range. Here it's a list. So range produces the list, so it saves it as a list, so it takes some memory. So the difference between the two, the range and x range functions, is subtle. I'll just briefly mention it here. So again, the range will produce the list, and the x range produce the object. Eventually, when you use or you call the elements of the x range, it will produce them. So if it's a for loop, it will produce them one at a time as you reach each element, versus the range, it will already create the entire list. So if the list is small, it will not make that big of a difference. If the range you're creating is very large and you're not really necessarily accessing every element in this range, say you have a for loop statement and you're going X range from say 0 to 1 million, but maybe in the way if you reach certain condition break, so you're not really necessarily going all the way to the end, so there's no need to create range. You create the entire list and you're not really going to access all of its elements. It makes sense to create a small X range and just use or access the element as you need it. This is just a little bit about the difference between range and X range. Let's look at some other functions here. We've seen the len function that goes usually with lists. So if you have a list defined, let's say a equals the range 11, and then you can do the len a to find the length of this list, 11 elements. We can use the sum of elements of a list, so sum a. That's a built-in function also. It sums all the numbers from 0 to 10, a total of 55. Notice that it really, for the sum command to work, or the sum function to work, it needs a sequence. So it's either a list or a tuple. So if you put, let's say, 2, 5, 6, this is an example here, it will give you an error. It's expecting probably a list here. So if you enter the numbers in a list, it will add no problem. Or a tuple. Tuple is also acceptable. So, double parentheses here. It will do that. Here's another function we can use. The compare command, cmp. Let's say compare 13, 7. It will return 1 if x is greater than y. If you have, it says here x, y, and it will tell you what it does here. Returns negative if x is less than y, and so on. So if you have 2, 8, it will return negative, and if you have equal numbers, it will return 0. It's nice sometimes to, for if statements, kind of really compact way of checking if x is less than or greater than or equal, and so on. You can put this in one command. Another neat function is the DivmodFunction, which give a tuple as an output. It says here x, y, takes 2 arguments here, and it gives out a tuple that contains the quotient and remainder. So let's say you have 31, 3. It will give out a tuple 10, 1. Again, quotient and remainder. Here's one more neat one that's very usable, the round function. Let's say round, and you have 2 point some decimal numbers here. It will round to the nearest integer by default, but if you add a second argument, let's say 3 decimal places, it will round to the nearest 3 decimal places. This is just a subset of the available built-in functions in Python. I just wanted to share with you the ones that are kind of basic and easy to see, and they're usable. I hope you find this useful. As usual, thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.